Hello and welcome back to my channel as we continue Scream Week. Now today's video will be covering the third entry in the franchise, Scream 3, which is the final film in this 5-film Blu-ray set. So I popped in last night, watched it, and I have a lot of thoughts that I want to go over with you guys today. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Let's review Scream 3. The film saw the return of Wes Craven to cap off his trilogy as the director. Though there would be a new writer, Kevin Williamson just had too many other sort of things that he was working on. He was directing his directorial debut, Killing Mrs. Tingle. He was working on television and things like that. So he wasn't able to return, and his original sort of plan for a third film was discarded mostly by Aaron Kruger, who was the new writer, and he sort of went in a new direction. Now, this direction was informed by the studio's cautiousness in the aftermath of the Columbine school shooting, which had really there was already a conversation about violence and movies and video games and things like that, but this really supercharged that conversation, and it made the studio very nervous about putting a lot of violence in the movie, so they really wanted to lean on the humor, though Wes Craven really had to push back from them going completely bloodless, which is the idea they really wanted to go with, and he was like, basically, this is a Scream film, so we need to meet certain expectations, or we just have to call it something else. And so Scream 3 went ahead with some blood and gore, though there was still clearly an emphasis on the humor, which has always been a part of the franchise, though it's always been part of the recipe, not the full mix. And I think that this is something that's been a trend line in general that you can see with this trilogy. Each film, in a successive fashion, becomes less and less scary, brutal, or having that sort of heart that makes you care about these victims, and instead leans more on the humor and the self-aware meta-commentary that the first film really had and was really one of the main draws for that movie, though it wouldn't have worked as well as it did if it didn't have that humor and heart and brutality. And so it's a weird mixture that you have to really straddle the line perfectly, and Craven and Williamson had always been able to do that. Scream 3, I think, really shows them completely pushing in the wrong direction, going fully into the humor. For the most part, there's very little scary or tense moments or well-directed moments of chase sequences. It's mostly just watching annoying characters getting killed off one by one, ones that are completely disposable, and I think that's always been against the whole MO of the franchise. See, what the film really likes to do here is once again lean on that meta-commentary, that sort of self-aware nature, by having the sort of in-universe movie that's supposedly based off the true events, Stab. There's a third movie in production, and you have all these actors that are playing the characters from the first movie. Meanwhile, you have some of the surviving people, the real survivors of the tragedies, and they're there, and they're kind of intermingling with these people, but we don't really care about the cast, and they're just basically used to be disposable victims, and they're mostly annoying or dumb or just stereotypes and cliches. Other than Parker Posey, I absolutely love her. I mean, she is dumb in the movie, but I love her and Gale. The way that they interact with each other is just great, and I think that's one of the highlights of the movie, and really is some of the funnier stuff. It's the kind of Scooby-Doo stuff that's going on with Gale and the fake Gale as they go and dig into the archives, meet Carrie Fisher and all this stuff. That's great, and a lot of the humor does land in this movie, and I think that's what makes this movie still a pretty fun and enjoyable time, though there is some serious, deep flaws. And we really see this disposability that the film is treating its victims with in the final act as we get to this sort of gothic old Hollywood mansion, as they all in very quick succession get killed off one by one by Ghostface in really comical and stupid ways that we don't really... We're supposed to be like, oh, this is fun, this is great kills and everything, but it really just feels too quick to kill all tension. It just feels like this weird, murder spree that doesn't really fit with the Scream film at all, because we don't individually care about any of these characters, and so they're just being kind of dispatched one by one just to sort of rack up a kill count, which I think is, once again, just completely against the point of what Scream was trying to say about slasher movies, and instead it's going into the direction of some of those Nightmare on Elm Street sequels that really loved to just have more and bigger elaborate kills, really was always trying to, up the ante because that's what the audience expected and cared about at that point. And that's what we're starting to get to at a point with the Scream franchise, which was against the whole point of the franchise initially. And I think it's going away from its heart, its core, what makes it different and unique and interesting. But also, that's kind of inevitable as you continue to progress throughout a series, is that the sequels are going to lose some of that edge that made it interesting. One of the things that I really noticed and that I did like about this movie was the leaning in on a different sort of style than we've seen in the first two movies, and that was really leaning in on the Gothic, both on a thematic and production design level. So on the thematic level, you have all sorts of flashbacks and secret lives and secret sort of siblings and all sorts of things that are underneath the sort of exterior of what you would expect in Hollywood or within Woodsboro, and all of these things that we think we know are then the past is coming back to haunt us, essentially, in Sydney. And that's kind of a really cool twist. They're finally deciding to sort of shift the style of what we would expect away from just a ordinary teenage slasher to this weird sort of gothic movie that I like that element of it. And I do think some of it lands pretty well. You also have the production design that it especially is present in the final act, in that old Hollywood Gothic mansion, which has all sorts of secret rooms and passageways and sort of like, the old school bookcase that leads to a secret door, and there's all sorts of weird places where who knows what's going on, all sorts of sinister sort of implications in all these secret rooms. And I love that. And it really, in my opinion, is a really smart production design choice, and it elevates a pretty silly movie for the most part to at least have some sort of grander ambitions, and I like that. Though I would say that alone does not make a movie, and a lot of the aspects work against the gothic appeal that it's trying to elevate. It's trying to have this sort of style, but the gimmickiness, the silliness of the movie kind of undermines that at almost every single turn. Another thing that kind of leans into this thematic idea of sort of dark secrets and pasts that are coming back to haunt characters is the, in a way, meta, this is another meta aspect of the movie, but it's also like a serious critique of Hollywood, and that is the discussion of sexual abuse by Hollywood producers. And there's a big scene in the movie where the producer sort of talks about Maureen Prescott and her name being Rena Reynolds in the past, and she was secretly an actress for a couple of years before she was sexually abused by this old Hollywood film producer, Milton, who is now a character that's producing Stab 3. That sort of sparked the whole trilogy, the whole events of the series is all from that same sort of sin of the sexual abuse from the film producer, which is something that's very ironic and very sort of, like I said, a meta commentary on the fact that look who the producer is. Look at who's executive producing this movie, Harvey Weinstein, for his film company. It really puts it into a different light when you have that conversation with the film producer, and he's basically trying to rationalize the assaults that go on and all this sort of abuse of young women in the system.
Nothing happened to her that she didn't invite in one way or another, no matter what she said afterwards.
Are you saying
I'm saying things got out of hand.
I think that almost there's like sinister implications to that being in the movie, but there's also implications of like Wes Craven was obviously pissed off about what was going on in the system and wanted to sort of speak out against it. But at the same time, it's sort of sinister that Weinstein felt so comfortable within his position within Hollywood that he didn't even give a shit if he made a movie. He produced one with his own name on it that had a scene like that in there where they are not really saying that his rationalization for the abuse is okay. In fact, it's sort of rejected completely from the characters, and they condemn him. And in fact, his death is not something that we mourn for or care for at all. And in fact, he's one of the deaths in the series that we do sort of cheer on, and we're like, yes, you deserve it. But at the same time, there is that sort of sinister implication, like Weinstein felt completely comfortable, and it wasn't for another sort of decade plus before his crimes would come to light in the public, even though it was a well-known secret even at that time in Hollywood. And so it's definitely interesting that Craven just did not care at all and just was like, we're going to put that in the movie. We're going to really make a strong condemnation of this. But at the same time, the fact that Weinstein didn't care at all and liked the fact that that was in the movie, it just has this weird feeling to me. But even though it does make this movie a lot more interesting to watch on retrospect in the post-Me Too era. I think this sort of aggressive critique of Hollywood by Craven once again feeds into the film series' feminism, which has always been a strong sort of element of the series. Obviously, within Sydney's arc, her ability to become so self-sufficient, but also understanding that she needs to be around her family and her loved ones, and to be able to use that to overcome her trauma, to never be able to obviously get past it completely, but to be able to live with it and to be able to find a new way to find love and have a life, even after all the tragedies and traumas that she's had to endure. And so I think that this once again is a strong element of feminism within the series, and is definitely one of the starkest critiques of sort of the system of Hollywood in the way that they would abuse women at that time. The sad thing is that everyone knew about it, and there was decades of impunity for these men in powerful positions. And then when we finally did have a movement that was trying to reckon with it, trying to even bring a modicum of accountability to these monsters, there ended up becoming a counter movement. And it's something you can see within like the Epstein files, is that there was an organized pushback and feeding into a backlash of this movement that was trying to smear survivors of sexual abuse and violence. And it was trying to maintain the power structures that allow men to get away with all sorts of crimes against women. And I just find that really sad that even when we were finally having this moment, this time in our history where we were finally trying to hold these men accountable, it lasted only a very short time. And I'm very depressed by that. When you watch something like Scream 3, you realize that he literally didn't care that there was such a stark critique of him, literally in the movie that he was producing. And maybe he got off on that fact that he had so much power that he could produce a movie that was critiquing his own sort of modus operandi, and just have no care in the world or thought. And the fact is that he wasn't ever held accountable even until like a decade plus after this. So in a way, it kind of puts into question like how powerful is film to actually make change in society. And like I always say, you have to believe you're going to change the world even though you're probably not. But it's never really shown in such a stark way as we see here with this film. And it makes the film rewatchable, definitely, or on a rewatch, it makes it a lot more interesting to look at that angle of the movie. But at the same time, it kind of is a bit depressing to see the actual real life ramifications of this sort of abuse that's sort of shown in the film, depicted in the film, in sort of conversation about the past times. And it was a different era, though it was still going on actively in the 2000s when that movie was being made. I definitely think that makes this movie one that's worth a little bit more conversation than it maybe would warrant otherwise, for being a movie that really does feel silly and goofy and over the top, and like every dumb horror sequel, like all the trends that you would expect in a dumb horror sequel, especially for a slasher franchise, they're all here. And Ghostface has really become neutered and not scary. And the big reveal at the end kind of just feels dumb, tacky, and just completely pointless. And I understand they're trying to recontextualize the whole series, and they're trying to add this twist that totally makes us have a different understanding on the whole sort of chronology of how everything happened and what the real sort of driving force behind everything was. But to me, it just doesn't really work well. It doesn't land with what we understand of these characters for these movies. And there's just way too much time wasted on just kooky silliness. And like I said, the Parker Posey and Courtney Cox scenes, that's great.
It's worth $2,000. Are you gonna help Gail Weathers or not?
But a lot of the other silly stuff is just kind of, it's fun enough, but it doesn't feel like a Scream movie. It just feels like an actual parody movie. And you even see that at the ending, right? When they're talking about the rules of the trilogy, and they're saying, he's going to be invincible, the killer's going to be invincible. And Roman's dead on the floor, and they're like, oh, he might come back. And then Sidney's like, no, he won't. He's just a human. And then, sure enough, he comes back. They
What are you doing? What? Head! Shoot him in the head!
shoot him like 20 times, Dewey does, and then shoot him in the head. And it's just, that was such a goofy, silly, ridiculous ending that once again undermines any level of seriousness that the movie was going for. And so I don't understand why they were leaning so much on the humor when Craven said, if we're going to make a Scream movie, we have to make it a Scream movie. I don't know if the writing was just so poor, of a downgrade. You go from Williamson to Aaron Kruger. And so maybe that was such a downgrade that's what harmed the movie ultimately. Obviously, there was already somewhat of a trajectory between Scream 1 and 2 that was going downward in its seriousness and its ability to still have heart and still make us care about the brutal killings on display. But I just think that this movie doesn't work as well. It doesn't, it's still paced well enough. It's a fun movie. It's enjoyable. It's funny. You still love these characters, and there's still good performances by a lot of the actors and actresses in the film. And I love the recreation of Woodsboro that they have on the film set, and that scene with Sidney there is a highlight of the whole series for sure. So there is really strong moments here and there, but they are so few and far between in just a sea of silliness that undermines almost any good thing that happens. So this becomes a real mixed bag of a movie. It's still okay and enjoyable and watchable, but ultimately it really does pale in comparison to the first two Scream movies. That's all I really have to say about Scream 3. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of the movie. And I want to just thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I drop a new video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Miguel would be much more aggressive.
Miguel would suspect everybody. Miguel would march.
Shut up!